Okay, my motivation today is that when I was in high school and learned about the first internal revenue tax in the 1790s, actually it's 1791, the taxation of domestically distilled spirits, which brought on the Whiskey Rebellion, and that was the entire story of taxation. We were going to rely on import duties. I'm sorry to say that that's not the story of financing our country in the 1790s. I hope to correct that today. Okay, there was a series of things called the Federalist Papers that were published in the late 1780s. They are to inform the Constitution and how the new government was going to function. And from Federalist Paper number 12, I know you can read this, but I'm going to read part of this. In so opulent a nation as that of Britain, where direct taxes from superior wealth must be much more tolerable, and from the vigor of the government much more practicable than in America, far the greatest part of the national revenue is derived from taxes of the indirect kind, from imposts and from excises. Duties on imported articles form a large branch of this latter description. So England also relied very much on import duties. Dare I say that in 1719, a little bit before the 1790s, Britain decided that they weren't getting enough from import duties, and they also established a tax on domestically distilled spirits. It wasn't popular. In the rural areas, the complaint was, who passed this? The members of Parliament. Where do most members of Parliament come from? Manchester, Birmingham, and London. This is taxation without representation. That is not an American phrase. It was brought to this country from England. Continuing in Federalist Paper number 12, in America it is evident that we must a long time depend for the means of revenue chiefly on such duties. In most parts of it, excises must be confined within a narrow compass. Okay? So this is prior to the ratification of the Constitution. Here's a document that I found a number of years ago. It is a shipment from Rhode Island to Alexandria, Virginia. I know it's too small to read, and I'm not going to read the whole thing to you. It is July 1789. U.S. Customs was established effective August 1st, 1789. So this is prior to U.S. Customs. This shipment is subject to import duties into Virginia. Why? Rhode Island hasn't ratified the Constitution, so they're not part of the United States. And it is payable in Virginia currency. Virginia currency? There is no U.S. currency yet. What a document. So we can imagine why the merchants of Rhode Island went to the governor and said, you get the legislature back in session and you ratify the Constitution, because our neighbors in Connecticut and Massachusetts, those merchants that are our competitors, can ship things to Virginia and they're not charged import duty. Only we are, because we're not part of the United States. Another Federalist paper, number 35. The maxim that the consumer is the payer is so much oftener true than the reverse of the proposition, that it is far more equitable that the duties on import should go into a common stock than that they should redound to the exclusive benefit of the importing states. In other words, we take away the privilege of imposing import duties from the states, and it is proposed that that becomes part of the federal revenue. Okay? Now, the other thing that happens, in order to get people to ratify the Constitution, to make it very appealing to do so, was that the federal government, Hamilton and the federal government said, many of the states, maybe all of the states, still had debt from the Revolutionary War. And so if you ratify the Constitution, the federal government will assume the state's debt from the Revolutionary War. Which means that the government starts with a large amount of debt. And Hamilton wants to reduce that debt. Think about that in 2026 for a moment. It's a very different kind of thing. Here's an import document from August of 1789. This is late in August. This is the first month of import duties. They're importing from New Brunswick 7 cords of firewood into New York City. The duty is to be paid in Halifax currency. Halifax isn't in New Brunswick. Okay? In 1791, but first of all, we had a lot of import duties. Act number 2 of Congress in 1789, July 1st, 1789, is the import duties. It is a long list. In 1791, they decided that the receipts for the payment of the tax we should make it really official, and that receipts should go with goods, 3 types of goods. Imported distilled spirits, which would have been imported in large barrels. Wine, there is no domestic wine in 1789. And tea. And up there in sort of the upper left corner is an embossed seal. One of the first things that they did in Act number 1 was to appoint a supervisor of the revenue for each district. Those districts coincided with the state boundaries. So there is an embossed seal. I know you can't see it very well. And there is simply a letter there for each different district. District A is Georgia. District B is South Carolina, and so on, up the coast. This happens to be the earliest one known from Rhode Island, and I had to have a lawyer read it and tell me what it meant. It meant that there was already a barrel of rum in Rhode Island, in Providence, Rhode Island, that was there before July 1st. So it was not subject to the import duty. And so this is the supervisor of revenue for Rhode Island saying, no duty is due, was due, and therefore you shouldn't see something that says the duty has been paid on. Okay.
Is that what it means by old stock?
Yep. It is old stock from before July 1. It's already in a bonded warehouse.
So they got a pile of old stock before July 1?
Well, you could import during the 1780s, couldn't you? Sure. Okay. Hamilton was very unhappy with the amount of money that was coming in through import duties, and he didn't see the debt of the United States coming down very quickly. So therefore, he must have twisted a lot of arms in Congress to establish a tax on domestically distilled spirits. And this is from, it's actually, it was established in 1791, and that first set of duties applied until July 1st, 1792. This is from earlier 1792, and it's the amount of tax. So this is the first. This is the first internal revenue tax. Hamilton immediately heard lots of protests about this tax, and so therefore Congress decided in 1792 that effective July 1st, 1792, we will reduce the rate of tax on domestically distilled spirits. You remember that from high school, that they reduced the amount of internal revenue tax, right? That's never mentioned. The Whiskey Rebellion doesn't occur until 1794, okay? And this is another document showing that the tax on domestically distilled spirits is reduced. The amount of tax is not mentioned on any of these. Oh, there are two sets of rates. If you're using domestic materials, it's one rate. If you're using foreign imported materials in your distillery, it's a higher rate. What would that be? Rum. What do you need to make rum? You need molasses. Did we produce molasses up in Massachusetts? No. Rum was the most popular thing in Massachusetts. You go to New York State, the most popular distilled spirits, anybody know? Gin. Why gin?
Dutch.
The Dutch. Right. Okay. Now, when you went off to buy your distilled spirits, they remove it from the large barrels and put it into a smaller container. You might have brought the container in yourself, probably did. And you walked out with it, having paid for the distilled spirits. Okay. Now, these documents are the same documents that were used in imported spirits. And so Hamilton decided, he wrote to each of his supervisors. This one is from New York State, Nicholas Fish. Anybody know anything about Nicholas Fish? How about Hamilton from the Revolutionary War? Hamilton led a group of soldiers that caused the British to lose the Battle of Yorktown. He broke through the line, and he wanted to go back to tell George Washington that he had just succeeded in doing so. And he left Nicholas Fish in charge of the troops that he had been leading. Reasonable thing to do. If you're going to establish an internal revenue service and you want somebody you can trust, who are you going to appoint? Somebody that you knew and you knew you could trust. And he had trusted him at the Battle of Yorktown. So Hamilton writes a circular letter to each of the supervisors saying, we've got these documents for imported distilled spirits and for domestically distilled spirits. I want the wording to be the same because we're in trouble because of domestically distilled spirits. But we need to record how much is import duty and how much is domestic internal revenue tax income. And so therefore, I want you to twist the seal if it's domestic so that the eagle is facing the supervisor's signature in the lower right part of the document. Those words, without illustration, were interpreted differently in different districts. And so it's fun to find these rotated seals, and well, it's rotated 45 degrees here in this state, but over in the other state, it's rotated 90 degrees and all kinds of things. So it's fun collecting this stuff, okay? So we're gonna hide whether it's imported or domestic. That's all we learned in high school about taxation during the 1790s. But in 1794, Hamilton convinced Congress to establish licenses, two kinds of licenses. If you're going to sell wine, you must have a federal license. It's going to cost $5 per year. They are the first, and there's an embossed seal up there that has $5 on it. It is the first thing that we have seen that has US currency denominated on the seal, 1794. Those of you who have collected coins know that we already had half pennies, pennies, etc. by 1794. And it's one license is for wine. If you're going to sell imported distilled spirits, you got to have the second license as well. They were separate licenses. So now we have not only the internal revenue tax on domestically distilled spirits, we now have another revenue stream of an internal revenue tax for dealers in foreign distilled spirits and wine, which has been important. Now, those licenses were produced centrally, and the seal was imposed. New York State did not like the wording on it. And so the wording of these licenses in New York State is different. And I'm not going to read it to you, but there is a phrase down towards the bottom of that license that says, if your municipality has decided that it wants to be dry, no alcohol to be sold, you may not get one of these licenses and tell everybody, yes, but the federal government just licensed me to sell this stuff here. I like to call that a states' rights clause in these licenses. That comes back. This all, by the way, all these taxes disappear in 1802 when Thomas Jefferson becomes president. In the Civil War, we again created licenses for a bunch of things. If you're going to run a lottery locally, you need a federal license. If you're going to sell distilled spirits, you need a license. They arrested somebody in New Jersey for selling distilled spirits because the town said, we don't permit distilled spirits. That gets dragged into the federal courts. The federal Internal Revenue wants to protect its source of revenue. And they get it into the federal courts, and it goes all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And at the end of 1866's Supreme Court session, they go to Congress and say, we're not deciding it, we're going to decide this case at the beginning of the next term, but you're going to lose. Congress said, wait a minute, we need that revenue. What are we going to do? So what they did was they rewrote the law. I like to call it baptizing the old law and getting rid of the word license, and it becomes a special tax on occupations with the clause that if it's not legal locally, you can't use the federal. It's not a license any longer. It is paying a tax on the occupation. Okay, so this comes back, but this is a very significant thing. And it's the state where Hamilton came from that did this. And again, it's signed by Nicholas Fish. Okay, 1795 comes along. We're not collecting enough revenue to reduce the debt of the federal government. So therefore, we are going to establish a direct tax on property owners. And we decide that we're going to assign a certain amount that each state has to collect, and the state has to decide how to divvy it up among the property owners. This is called a direct tax. This happens to be dated 1805. I know that's during Jefferson's administration, but my suspicion is, it's the only example I have of the direct tax from the 1790s, that they hadn't collected it, and they were still trying to collect that tax from the 1790s. That tax comes back again in the War of 1812. 1814, 1815, 1816 have direct taxes. Property owners. We're still not collecting enough. And so in 1796, we decide that we're going to have licenses for stills. Not only are we going to tax the distilled spirits, we're going to create licenses for establishing stills. That way we get off to those guys that are in the backwoods, establishing a still, sending distilled spirits to the market, and are not paying for it. So we've got to establish who has a still. This is from 1800. This is the application that was made. This is a still license from Connecticut. It has the supervisor seal up there at the top. That's the same supervisor seal. Connecticut is the only state that I am aware of that used that embossed seal to authenticate these licenses, still licenses. We collected enough money yet? No. Again, 1796, I believe, is the beginning of this. We have an annual tax, federal tax, on carriages for the conveyance of people. Why is it worded that way? Well, we don't want to. There are a lot of farmers that have wagons that could carry people but weren't designed for carrying people. We don't want to hit the farmers. We want to hit the people that have carriages for the conveyance of people. This is from the state again of New York, 1796. Another tax. There are no embossed seals on this. Stamp collectors don't collect this, except I do. This was for $2 for a chair owned by this person on top of wooden springs. If it's steel springs, you pay $1 more per year. It has no top. If it has a top, it's going to be more. If it's got elaborate stuff on the side, you're going to pay more. And these taxes go up to, I believe, $10 a year, depending upon the type of carriage that you have. I have had trouble reading the law and going online to find out what is a chair, what is a chaise, what is a coach, what is a coachee. And the illustrations are not necessarily from the 1790s, and they're not consistent. So, not all the right answers are posted on the internet. Maybe someday I'll get it figured out. A chair doesn't have a top, typically. This is from a later period of time. I'd say a chair is sort of the equivalent of a sports car in this period of time. And it's at the lower end of the kind of carriages that are for the conveyance of people. This is for a chaise. I have no idea what the difference between a chaise and a chair is. Well, I do, but I can't confirm it. 1798, we're still not collecting enough money. Hamilton is no longer in charge of the Treasury Department, but his influence is there. And this is a bill of exchange. Anybody know what a bill of exchange is? You will see that this was created in Alexandria, Virginia. The year is 1798. It is something that is going to Liverpool, England, and it is payable there. And it is paid to be paid in pounds, shillings, and pence. So it's sort of like our check, but it usually involves a company, usually not a bank, but a company somewhere else. They had money on account there, and they're saying, we'll pay you, but you've got to go to Liverpool to get the money. And that kind of thing occurs throughout not only the 18th century, but the 19th century as well, and it continues into the 20th century. They are called bills of exchange. There are domestic bills of exchange. If you went to the gold rush in California in the late 1840s, how do you get paid? We don't trust the local merchants. We've got an account in New York, and we issue a bill of exchange. It involves several different people. And you usually sent them, 2 of them, to get paid. The first one gets paid, then the second one doesn't get paid. But there's a tax on each of them. And they are sent by different routes. Why would they send them by different routes? Is it safe to send something across the country in 1850? No. Now this is made out where? Where did I say? Alexandria, Virginia. There's a tax on these financial transactions. I know this is hard to read because there's printing on top of it, but this was, has the word Maryland at the bottom of it. This piece of paper was created in Maryland. It came from the supervisor of revenue in Maryland, and it is for 50 cents on that transaction that we just saw. And it didn't matter where you got the paper, the money went to the federal government, and you could use it anywhere in the country. I think we're at the end. Yes. Questions? So lots of taxes in the 1790s. Yes?
So when did dollars and cents come into use?
Well, in the, it's good questions. We certainly have,
When did dollars and cents, when were they?
we certainly have states issuing coins in the 1780s. If you collect coins, you can find large cents from different states, most of the states. The federal government did not have currency. And so those were dollars and cents. If you ever find a check written in the 1780s, it is denominated in dollars and 90ths of a dollar. That should register with you. Why 90ths of a dollar? I have read that is to make it easier to exchange with foreign currencies, presumably British currency, but I don't know that. By the time we get to the 1790s, it is 100 cents. So they are dollars and hundreds. But dollars come in the 1780s, but they are state established dollars. There is no federal currency in the 1780s. The first coins, any coin collectors out here? 1792, 1793. It's that period of time. Yep. Other questions?
So, what's the infrastructure that collects the taxes? I mean, it looked kind of willy-nilly there, so.
Well, it is.
Just random people collecting taxes.
We have established in each district, state, a supervisor of revenue. Who reports to that supervisor of revenue? He's got lots of inspectors and things that go around and collect these. There are lots of people involved. They even have somebody in each port involved in import duties that go through the supervisor of revenue. It is a really a lot of people, and that notion of still licenses is because we've got a lot of rural area, and it's impossible to have somebody running around those rural areas catching everybody. So, yeah, but it's the supervisor of revenue, and they report to Internal Revenue, the U.S. Treasury Department, the beginning of Internal Revenue. Now that disappears in 1802. Comes back again during the War of 1812. Disappears in 1817.
Disappears because the taxes disappear?
Yep. Taxes disappear. And then it comes back to what we know as the Internal Revenue Service, which is established July 1st, 1862. Yep. Other questions? Good questions. Yes?
Now, I thought I remembered Hamilton was in favor of a central U.S. bank.
Yes, and we get that in the 1790s. But it's established for a given number of years, and then it disappears, and then they decide that it has to come back again, and we have the second Bank of the United States as well. I believe that each one is 25 years. And then eventually disappears. Yes?
One more question. How did you get a hold of these documents that you wanted?
Well, they sometimes appear on eBay. They appear at stamp shows. Those of us who have collected tax stamps are familiar with dealers who specialize in that kind of thing. Yeah. There are a bunch of them up on eBay that are priced at somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 times what I paid for them, and I told them they're full of it. Yeah. Yes.
Just a comment, and neither hair. I really like your do.
Well, Hamilton was supposed to be here, and I thought I needed something to sort of make it look like Hamilton presenting this, because it is his ideas that brought on internal taxation.
Where did the tariffs fit in? I've heard you talking about the tariffs before. Where do they fit in with the revenue?
Well, they're collected by the same supervisor of revenue. They're all under the same thing. The U.S. Customs operates in the ports, but they report to the supervisor of revenue. So Hamilton had a notion of organization that it all came through and went to the Treasury Department. He was, of course, head of the Secretary of Treasury.
Your lecture on tariffs was basically going to the same.
Yes. Yeah.
Why the emphasis on alcohol?
Well, when we want to do something like that, we look around and say, what are other people taxing? And I mentioned at the beginning today that England had a tax on alcohol established in 1719. So it came from, they looked around and said, well, they're taxing it. If you look at the history of taxation in this country, there are a number of things that are taxed that are considered sinful. Alcohol, wine, playing cards, tobacco, and all of those come about because they are considered you can do without. Sin taxes.
It's not for health reasons?
They didn't know about the health at that point, I think. Yes.
Since we're in the land of Robert Morris, and Morris and Hamilton had great exchanges over time, and similar views on the need to establish credit for the country and financial structure in the U.S. Curious about what was in a short period of time was an effective currency that Robert Morris had, long bobs and short bobs.
I don't know. I don't know.
Okay. I was just curious whether any of those exist out there.
I don't know. Any other questions? Yes.
In your tax stamps for liquor, I didn't see anything about proof.
Yes, there is proof.
Did come into play at that time?
It sure did. Let me, on those documents, if it says it is distilled spirits of the first proof, it is no more than 90 proof by today's standard. They didn't have hydrometers that were as precise as they became later on. I believe they're called, and I don't know the pronunciation, it's DYCAS. Dicus hydrometer. If it is of the second proof, it is between 90 and 95. It is of the third proof, it is between 95 and 100. And the highest proof that I've seen is 40 proof, and that's over 100 proof. I believe it's 100 to 110, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. But again, it is done by hydrometers, even to this day. Yeah. But we've got more precise hydrometers today. Well, thank you for your questions. They were very good.